By 1774, when the young King Louis XVI ascended the throne with his Austrian wife following the death of his grandfather, his birthplace and inheritance, the vast and once spectacular estate at Versailles, had fallen into sad disrepair. The famous fountains, fed by pumps at Marly, had long since broken down from corrosion, no longer able to display the powers of a king over the natural world, or as one diplomatic visitor put it, the marvels that the waters produce in this delightful place. Gloomier still were the old groves of trees laid out by Le Notre, now wizened and dying, gnarled and decaying reminders of the absolutist age in which they had been planted. While money may have been the immediate reason for the decline of the once celebrated gardens, why the decline of the once celebrated gardens had not been reversed, another was the fact that in the centuries since Versailles' construction as a theatre of performed power, Baroque spectacle had become wearisome to its fashion-conscious visitors of the 18th century. The enchanted Isle of the Sun King had lost its capacity to enchant or reflect the values of current governing elites in an age of enlightenment, and would need to rediscover a capacity to do both again were it to continue to serve its new occupants at all. In 1774, this year of change, the wealthy Paris tastemaker and garden connoisseur Claude-Henri Vatelet singled out Louis XIV's gardens at Versailles in his Essai sur les jardins as an example of what was wrong with formal French garden design, writing with distaste of the, quote, vast and walled enclosures with clustered plantings aligned in straight and symmetrical lines, sad promenades that come to us from feudal ages. Vatelet's passionate concern was to promote their modern antidote, the relatively wild and meandering Jardin Anglais, or English garden, extolled by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, which lost the spectator deliciously in nature, releasing the imagination while thrillingly evoking the individual political liberties and legal philosophical underpinnings of the island which produced it. The young king and his queen were as susceptible as anyone else in fashionable ranks to this inexorable shift towards informality and the natural. In November 1774, 6 months after taking the throne, Louis ordered the renovation of the gardens, including the cutting down of the trees to be sold off for firewood, and requested the estate gardener Jean-Eustache Lemoine to replant with a vastly simplified schema. Shortly after this uncharacteristically bold decision, Louis commissioned the landscape painter Hubert Robert to paint a pair of pictures commemorating the decision. The first shows the stripping out of the 1706 shrubbery planted by Ardouin Mansart around the baths of Apollo, one of the sculptural groups most identified with the estate's original creator, Louis XIV. The second is a view of earthworks taking place around the tapis vert, or lawn. In this scene, Marie Antoinette and her female entourage are shown in the right-hand side of the picture, and to her right is Louis XVI, appearing deep in conversation with an advisor, traditionally identified as the Comte d'Angevilliers, director of the Bâtiment du Roi. To the left of the picture, local woodcutters and their families work at clearing the felled royal timber. At first glance, they form a scene of bucolic harmony, their general air of ease and relaxation echoed by the twin brothers, Castor and Pollux, by Kosovo on the marble plinth overhead, whose arms are languidly draped around one another in an informal expression, or even an anticipation, if you think of the revolution to come, of fraternal love and affection. Paula Ria Radicic, if that's how you pronounce, I don't know how you pronounce her name, Radicic, I'm assuming, has noted how, in key ways, this picture and the previous one were intended to represent new beginnings, not only for the Garden of Versailles, but for the nation more widely. It shows the new Louis as a benevolent and consultative gardener of the French state. Here he is seen as a regenerative figure, reforming a neglected and rotten garden in line with progressive ideas. It is Louis himself who has assumed personal responsibility for the weighty symbolism of dislodging royal sculptures and toppling the trees of past kings. The resulting disorder simply underscores the point that reform is inevitably a work in progress. The self-evident need for it to begin is apparently confirmed by the unforced participation of the families of the estate, representing the people. Yet amid these propitious beginnings, and as Robert's work on the pictures were underway, signs of trouble were appearing on the lands at Versailles, reverberations which Paul Radicic has argued register in Robert's final paintings. These were the grain or flour riots triggered by a recent relaxation of trade controls coupled with seasonal shortages. Originating in Champagne in March 1775, by early May, thousands had made their way to Versailles, calling on their king for affordable bread. The atmosphere at Versailles in early 1775 was febrile, or in Radicic's words, laced with insubordination and violence. Fearful that the chateau would be set upon, Louis was said to have retreated indoors. Radicic notes a hint of defiant menace in the folding arms of the standing worker and the other estate workers' apparent indifference to the presence of their king. She proposes that the local labourers of Versailles represent in many ways le petit peuple of France. They comprise what she calls the, quote, unstable mass of valets, pensioners, workmen of the Bâtiment du Roi, itinerant merchants and petty wage earners, as well as the beggars, vagabonds, pickpockets and petty thieves, unquote, who pestered visitors to the royal estate. This tense and deflected moment was an early test between the king and his subjects, whose symbolic role involved guaranteeing their daily bread. For that reason, Radicic reads Robert's garden scene as an allegory of fragile harmony, the seesaw placed in the centre symbolising the precarious shift of power to a new monarch. So what is this picture really about? If the background and sightlines of this picture offer a vision of eternal calm and rational order, harking back to the Sun King's time, the near distance, by contrast, represents the early months of 1775 and seems to offer more disturbing hints of short-term disorder and chaos than it does clear signs of positive change. Are the workers of the estate shown seated, leaning against plinths or with their backs to the royal group, that includes mothers talking to their children, are they simply resting or are they waiting? Part and parcel of the new naturalism and palpable informality of the new monarchy is a dwindling authority and disintegrating social order, and that introduces perhaps a new note of ambiguity and contingency to these pictures. In 1775, a full century of the Sun King's legacy at Versailles had passed, and with the recent death of Louis XV, a golden age of patronage from the recent king had also closed. A generation of artists, architects and luxury craftsmen who had worked for Louis XV and his last mistress, Madame du Barry, stood to benefit from the aesthetic rejuvenations of the new Louis and his queen, in line with their preferences for informality and privacy. The architect Richard Mique, for example, successfully interpreted the cravings of the young Marie Antoinette for seclusion and a human-scale charm in his remodelling of the Petit Trianon, once owned by Madame du Barry, which had been bestowed on the Queen by her husband in the year they ascended to the throne. Mique furnished her with, among other things, her own little belvedere and Grecian temple on the grounds of her private precinct at Versailles. He also created an Anglo-Chinese garden of confected cliffs and lakes, artificial mountains, rocks and bridges that were freed from what Patrice Higonnet has called the compulsions of classical design. The Duc de Quay, who had not yet seen the Petit Trianon since Louis XV's death, expressed astonishment at what he discovered in 1776. He wrote, "I thought I must be mad or dreaming when I found rather high mountains and a rocky outcrop with a river, where once had been Europe's greatest hothouse. Never have 2 acres of land been changed as much, nor at such great expense." Unquote. The bronze caster and decorative metal sculptor par excellence, Pierre Gautier, was another beneficiary of the patronage. The subject of a revelatory recent exhibition at the Frick, Pierre Gautier had prospered, on paper at least, from the patronage of the discerning du Barry, but he was also on hand to provide gilt bronze mounts for any one of her successors' projects. These are the little dromedaries from a Salon Turc. Likewise, though slightly for the projects, as was the marble sculptor Agostino Bocciardi, engaged to work on the merry-go-round and planned mirror at the Trianon in 1777. Likewise, though further afield, were directors of the royal manufactories, such as the Sèvres painter Jean-Jacques Bachelier, the head of a painting workshop, and the Paris furniture maker Georges Jacob, on hand to fill royal orders for floral dinner services, wheat sheaf chairs, like we've seen in the exhibition, and other luxury items for the Petit Trianon and royal apartments. Despite their own inclinations towards the intimate large diversions and spectacles, sorry, I've got a cold, so I'm just trying to sort of temper that, my delivery with the congestion. Despite their own inclinations towards the intimate, large diversions and spectacles continued under the new reigning family. The young architect François-Joseph Bélanger, who had begun his career working at the Menu Plaisir du Roi in 1767, was promoted to director of the Menu Plaisir 3 years into the new king's reign, designing ephemeral decorations for court fêtes, such as the illuminated night festivals and diversions at the Trianon, recorded by Hubert Robert and Claude-Louis Châtelet. Meanwhile, Robert himself enjoyed a remarkable rise, appointed in 1784 as designer to the king's public gardens, including the Tuileries Gardens in Paris and Rambouillet. In this role, Robert was able to extend the quest to naturalise the French landscape far beyond that of his friend Meek's remit at Trianon, and bring the picturesque natural garden more fully into the French national idiom. All of these men and many others, through their many highly collaborative and creative enterprises at Versailles, were instrumental in recasting the imaginary of a modern French Versailles as a new, regenerated, enchanted island, informed by the new ideas of the Enlightenment. Each acquired fame and was living a semi-noble life in the last days of the Ancien Regime. The many charming innovations that they introduced no doubt did much to enhance the royal family's sense of personal liberation from the court and closeness to nature, virtuous closeness to nature. Yet they did not translate into greater political freedoms or improvement to the lot of ordinary subjects. The simplifications of court life produced some modest savings, it's true, yet the French court still remained the most extravagant in Europe. And the changes at Versailles had, as Duc de Croix had noticed with surprise, been undertaken at great expense to a bankrupted nation. By September 1792, the people had tired of waiting for any reform from the monarchy. The Republic of France was declared. The king was executed in early 1793, and the Queen followed him to the scaffold 9 months later. I'll just have some water from this well-used glass. Nobody drink from it after me, okay? In a bid to prevent backsliders, the law of suspects was declared in September 1793, allowing for the imprisonment of anyone thought to be a possible enemy of the new republic. This now notorious law, which marked the reign of terror, was a key instrument for rounding up retainers and beneficiaries of the former court. By 1794, every one of the architects and artists I've just listed had been key to who had been key to Louis and Marie Antoinette's refurbishments at Versailles was in prison. That's Gautier, Bélanger, Robert, Bachelier, Bocciardi, Jacob, Mick, Gautier, Bélanger, Robert, and etc. And that's been the subject of my recently finished doctoral research. This is not to say that every one of these men had rejected the revolution. Despite his friendly footing with the royal family, Hubert Robert recorded with enthusiasm the great journée of the revolution. That's an example of the collaborative works between Gautier, Bélanger, Bocciardi, etc. I'll just take you through here. He recorded the demolition of the Bastille in 1789, and the Paris celebration held on its first anniversary, the Fête de la Fédération, in July 1790. Robert even depicted preparations in the lead up to that anniversary, known as the Day of the Wheelbarrows, in which Parisians of all classes and ages, in both sexes, spontaneously helped with the earthworks to make the enormous event on the Champ de Mars possible. It is no surprise to learn that Robert, whose patriotism had been impugned by his arrest, remained optimistic for the revolution while he was in prison, waiting with equanimity for his release, drawing and painting as conditions permitted, and also as the conditions gradually turned from lenient to sinister with the course of the terror. It's not as if there were not historic and new events to record. There were plenty. Though the rituals and spectacles of the court and church had ended, another form was gathering pace, namely the regular programme of patriotic festivals organised by Jacques-Louis David as Robespierre's effective minister for the arts and head of the Ministry for Propaganda, the Committee of Public Instruction. Incredible as it may sound, many suspects in the terror found ways to participate in these national events within the confines of their prisons, improvising liberty trees, conducting parades and singing patriotic hymns. Of particular importance to the prison community, however, was the Festival of the Supreme Being, designed to celebrate a new republican religion founded on a concept of justice and intended to discourage atheism, with the consoling idea that there was immortality for the soul after all. When announced on 7 May 1794, the nation had 1 month to prepare for the Midsummer Festival, designed to take place under a bright summer sun. News of the festival was greeted with joy across the nation. It's arriving in the villages by messenger. But most of all, perhaps, by prisoners who had heard that an amnesty was imminent and would be declared on the day of the festival, thereby ending the terror that had placed them and their lives in such jeopardy. Every locality of France was instructed to conduct a commemorative event on 8 June 1794, according to published cues about the details of their outdoor staging, to ensure general coordination with the festivities in Paris, all to be organised by David. One prisoner recalled, "So we are now going to be recognising justice and humanity. Our fate is going to change. We are going to be given the liberty of which we were so unjustly deprived. We will celebrate with our brothers who prepare the feast, and we can hold them in our arms again, and that day will be the most beautiful of our lives." The mother event was to be held at the Tuileries Garden, which Robert was in theory responsible for in previous years. It had now been renamed the National Garden, and also at the Champ de Mars, now renamed Field of the Réunion, and in the intervening spaces. The guillotine was dismantled and an artificial mountain was constructed on the Field of the Réunion, supposedly to be topped with a Greek temple. That was abandoned, but that was the idea, and a tree of liberty and a pedestal. And from that pedestal had been removed a statue of Louis XVI, and now it was to boast a giant figure of Hercules. Nearby, a large plaster monument of the female personification of wisdom, draped in flowers and sheaves of wheat, was to be seated on a plinth above the large circular basin, already in situ, the famous bassin at the former Tuileries. The view of this statue of wisdom was, however, to be initially blocked by a monstrous papier-mâché effigy of atheism. This horror creature, which sported the ears of an ass, was designed to be set alight by Robespierre and reduced to ashes, revealing the figure of wisdom presiding over the basin, which represented the wellspring of liberty itself. A number of artists depicted the festival. Their scenes offer invaluable eyewitness testament to the overall effect of the ephemeral monuments, the crowds, and also the drama. One close-up view by an anonymous artist shows the whoosh of smoke by the Ruggieri Fireworks Company that involves atheism and reveals wisdom. Here's one of the festivals being celebrated in a prison. And here is the whoosh of smoke in broad daylight, taking a horrible figure of atheism away in a gust of wind, replacing it with the wonderful spectacle of wisdom. A more panoramic view by Pierre de Machy shows the wider mise en scène with the mountain and the liberty tree, Hercules and the seated figure of wisdom, but not interestingly, the large basin at ground level, which was fed from the pump at Pont Neuf, itself a small sort of feat of engineering, but that's been obscured by the crowd. Sadly, the community inside the prison of Saint-Lazare was compelled to hear at second hand about the spectacle that later engulfed the heart of Paris on 8 June. Especially regrettable was the fact that Hubert Robert, who had created definitive visual records of the Festival of the Federation and the fall of the Bastille, should be unable to attend. It is therefore unsurprising, perhaps, that Robert found a way to come forward with a contribution of his own. Based on David's published prospectus, he visualised the plaster and cement figure of wisdom by Pasquier, which he correctly hazarded would look much the same as a coloured plaster statue of liberty, and he showed it being dragged into position by Sans-Culotte. A couple more sentences. Robert worked by candlelight to complete this drawing, and also a set of paintings of the festival to commemorate the events that Robert and his companions would never see. They've never been recognised as this subject, so this is a new one. What is immediately apparent is that his vision derived from the imaginary that he himself had helped to create at Versailles in those years after 1774. Robert has described the forms of the mountain, the Greek temple that was planned to go on top of it, but which is abandoned, Pache Mic's artificial mountain at the Trianon. He shows the liberty tree planned by David, the figure of wisdom, and the basin of liberty over which wisdom presides. It is not difficult to see that the Petit Peuple have now taken matters into their own hands. They have stopped waiting. They have nationalised the garden, the state garden of France, taken possession of it, making the fountains into collective spaces of refreshment from which all could drink equally from the spring of liberty. They have replaced the superannuated statuary of Louis XVI with a whole suite of allegoric images more relevant to their new age. And so here's a picture of the head of Louis in the corner under basically a tombstone. So thank you very much.